Good afternoon. We've heard the story over and over. Profitable corporations finding a loophole of the tax code to avoid their tax responsibility. It was known as corporate inversion. Some call it corporate desertion. These companies are finding ways to, at least on paper, move their operations overseas and reduce their tax burden. It's happened in at least 40 instances that we know of, and other companies still threaten to try and do this. We have to acknowledge what this means. These companies that are seeking these inversions under our tax code are escaping tax liability. It's been estimated that it will cost taxpayers $34 billion over 10 years if we don't close this tax loophole. I've seen it in my state over and over again, from companies as large as Walgreens Drugs to others that are in the pharmaceutical industry. What we're doing here is reintroducing a bill which has been brought before the Senate before by Carl Levin. I'm honored to take over his spot as the sponsor of this legislation, together with Jack Reed on our side of the rotunda, and suitably it'll be Sandy Levin, his brother, doing the work on the House side with Lloyd Doggett of Texas. We're here today because we believe that we need fairness in the tax code. We need to make sure the tax code reform is a benefit to American corporations, the ones that want to stay here, do business here, and not engage in this legal fiction. These are the ones who'll face added tax responsibilities because of these corporate inverters or corporate deserters. So that's part of our responsibility as well. The mechanism for this is very basic. It's a change in the law which closes the loophole, which we thought was pretty tight before, but has been used, unfortunately, by, as I mentioned, at least 40 corporations. So I thank my colleagues for reintroducing this legislation, and I hope that we can move it in this session of Congress during any debate on tax code reform. I see Congressman Sandy Levin is next up.
Thank you. Dick and I came to Congress together. There's a lot of talk these days, appropriately, about middle-class squeeze. The middle class, though the economy is growing much better, the middle class isn't doing nearly as well. And I think what the middle class wants us to do when they pay their fair shares is to close loopholes. And the inversion loophole is a major one. In May of last year, my brother on the Senate side with others here, and I with others introduced the inversion bill. It put a spotlight on a major loophole. And I think it helped spur the action by the Treasury Department. And so they, looking at their legitimate authority, came forth with a regulation or a set of regulations. But they acknowledged when that happened that it wasn't enough. And so here we are today reintroducing this bill. And to show you the need for it, the Joint Tax Committee looked again at the path of inversions and raised the amount of revenue that was involved from about $19 billion to over $33 billion. So we're here today on behalf of the taxpayers of this country saying to this Congress, when there's a loophole, close it. Tax reform is important, but we should not wait. Next is Jack Reed, and we've had such a good time working together on issues and on this one as well. Senator Jack Reed.
Thank you. Well, thanks very much, Sandy. I'm delighted to be here. Dick and Sandy and Lloyd and I all served in the House together, and now I'm pleased and proud to have Dick as my leader here in the United States Senate. But as my colleagues have said, nearly 50 companies have inverted since Congress took steps to try to end inversion. That was back in 2004, and it's not working because companies are still announcing their plans to invert or reporting that they're considering it. And these companies take advantage of all of the things American tax dollars provide, from tax credits for research and development, investments in transportation infrastructure, strong patent and copyright protections, to profiting for taxpayer-supported programs like Medicare and Veterans Health Administration. Yet they want to take, but they don't want to pay taxes. So this kind of tax dodge strikes most people as just plainly unfair. And it reinforces the view that these multinational corporations particularly play by a whole set of different rules than men and women are going to work every day. And this tax out, as Dick pointed out, is projected to cost Americans over $30 billion over the next 10 years if we don't do something about it. And the irony, of course, that'll take money away from research and development, from Medicare reimbursements, for all the things that they will demand, even higher rates of. It's not fair. And so that's why I'm very proud to join Dick Durbin and Sandy Levin, my dear friend, and Lloyd Doggett, my dear friend, to try to close this loophole and to move forward with a system that is fairer to the men and women who each day go to work for America, in America, and in other places. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jack, and thanks to all of you for reintroducing together this legislation. I think most American businesses, particularly small businesses, are paying their fair share of the cost of our national security and other vital services. This is about a few very large multinationals who've decided that it's in their economic interest to renounce their American citizenship or their corporate charter. And we say we should remove all incentive for them to dodge paying their fair share of taxes and desert America, because that really works to the disadvantage of small businesses and other businesses in our country. We want a level playing field for all business, and we want to encourage people to operate here in the United States. The Treasury Department did initiate some important action this fall to try to discourage this practice. And I think their rulemaking, their regulation and directive was an important step forward, but there is still more work that needs to be done. So appropriately, on a day when the President will talk about the tax code and how it affects the ability of all Americans to share in our economic prosperity and our need to make changes in it, we're focused on how we can have a level playing field for American business to see that there's not an unfair squeeze in the tax code of small business in America. Thank you.
Thanks, Lloyd. Questions? Yes.
Senator, it seems pretty likely that congressional Republicans will say, we'll look at this issue only in the context of broader tax reform. Is that satisfying to you if in fact it's part of the debate, or do you see that as just a diversion?
That may be the reality. But if we have to save this issue for tax reform debate, so be it. But if we're going to continue down the path that Senator McConnell has suggested, if there's an opening on the floor for amendments to be considered even before the tax reform issue comes to the floor, I think we ought to seize the opportunity.
Can I just add, tax reform is important, but as we showed last year, this issue should not wait because the inversions go on, and that's why the Treasury, the analysis by joint tax now is $33 billion over 10 years. So I don't think the need for tax reform should be used as an excuse to address an immediate need either in the Senate or in the House.
Senator Durbin, are you concerned that, though, in this atmosphere, that if the President, as expected tonight, talks about raising the capital gains and the reaction that will cause in the Republican caucus, are you concerned that it will poison the well for any kind of tax reform, the divisions that would appear over that issue?
I don't think so. I noted during the course of the last campaign that very few, if any, Republicans came to the defense of these inverting corporations. This is hard to explain and almost impossible to defend. And I think that this measure, when it comes right down to it, is going to be a tough one. You can be critical of the president's suggestion, and many Republicans will be. We can predict that without fear of being wrong. But having said that, faced with the reality of this vote as to whether we're going to allow corporations to renounce their citizenship to escape tax liability and shift that tax liability to other taxpayers and other businesses, that's a tough vote. You can say what you want about President Obama, and they certainly do. But when it comes down to that vote on their record, I think it's a hard vote.
As I recall, the 2004 legislation was passed in a Republican Congress and signed by a Republican president, if the facts are right. So this shouldn't be a Republican-Democratic issue. The first initiative, which they thought would help, was taken under Republican Congress and Republican president because they saw the same dangers that we see. And we're just saying it hasn't gone far enough. It still needs to be bolstered.
Senator,
In terms of the president's tax plan, there does seem to be a strong similarity on principle in terms of both of that plan and your guys' plan on the corporate side to eliminate tax loopholes that you view as being unfair, to level the playing field of making things fairer And I was wondering if you could speak to that and, sort of speak to the question of whether these things can be tied together.
Well, we know the president spoke out on this issue very forcefully, and we also know the Department of the Treasury changed some regulations which gave pause to some companies that were considering an inversion. So I believe the president is of a similar mind, if not like mind, to our position today. Beyond that, I can't tell you what the president's going to propose in detail. I just don't know. Yes?
Have you been in contact at all with the Treasury Department about whether or not they'll be moving forward with the next step?
I don't know. I haven't. What do you know, Sandy?
The answer is they're working on a further regulation, earnings stripping, but they are confined by their responsibilities, and is made clear by the Secretary of Treasury they can only go so far, and the Secretary Treasurer, the Treasury Secretary said Congress should act. So we don't have any inside information because they act within their purview without getting the approval of Congress.
One or two more questions.
You mentioned the Treasury regulations. That led to one major pending inversion to be halted. It seems to have stemmed the tide. Is your legislation still needed? Do you think that did enough to at least stem it, to maybe get you through a broader corporate tax reform discussion?
No, because as joint tax estimates, the inversion flow, if not flood, continues. And it's important. There have been some inversions since Treasury announced, and some that are contemplated. So the answer to your question is it was a step, but not enough.
One more? Two more. Go ahead.
Is the issue not that the U.S. corporate tax rate has failed to keep pace with international changes in the tax situation globally?
Let me say a word about that. First, the largest corporations don't pay the maximum tax rate. I've generally found in my experience it's small and medium-sized corporations that end up being nailed with the highest rate. Most of these large corporations have an effective tax rate that's in the teens, number one. Number two, if the goal is to create a corporate tax rate in America lower than any other country on earth, like Ireland, then I'm afraid we're going to find ourselves in an impossible situation, unable to raise the revenue we need to sustain our government. So I would hope that some of these corporations accept the responsibility of living in this great nation with all the benefits it produces and are prepared to pay their fair share of taxes. If it's a race to the bottom on tax rates, it's not something that I want to be part of.
Oh, so you can't lower the rate unless you address loopholes. You're going to have to address them.
A number of major corporations continue to pay their lobbyists more money than they pay the American Treasury in taxes in a number of years. It's been a great investment for them. They've done really well, and loophole maintaining. This one, the Secretary of Treasury has made clear without legislative action, we won't end all inversions. This is part of a broader issue of one loophole after another, like the earnings stripping to which Mr. Levin referred, where corporations doing business here in America are shifting earnings out of the country and not paying their fair share of taxes on that. I've addressed that in separate legislation called Stop Tax Havens with Senator Whitehouse. I think there's broad support within our caucus to do more to close these loopholes.
What's your strategy for the signing